The Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana had a competition in the early 1990s rock scene, but they had a lot in common: musical innovation, devoted fans, producer Butch Vig, and according to Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan, a shared go-to recording technique that led to some notable sonic similarities. Corgan pointed out the comparable production style during a 2022 interview. Although Corgan had a contentious relationship with Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain while the latter artist was still alive, the Smashing Pumpkins founder has softened on his public opinion of Cobain considerably in the years since his tragic passing. Still, that doesn't change the fact that the guitars on a particular Nirvana classic sound a lot like Corgan's. Billy Corgan explained he can trace a clear line from the common characteristics of his band Nirvana back to their mutual producer, Butch Vig. The Smashing Pumpkins first started working with producer Butch Vig while recording their 1991 debut studio album, Gish. Corgan was incredibly hands-on during the recording process, tracking all of the instruments on his own, much to the chagrin of his bandmates. During that time, he and Vig bounced ideas and techniques off one another that, according to Corgan, ended up in Nirvana's iconic album Nevermind later that year. Corgan described sitting with Vig on the bank of a lake in Wisconsin on July 4th, when the producer asked him if he wanted to hear what he had been working on with the Seattle grunge band Nirvana. Corgan said, "He's got a boombox, he presses it and it smells like Teen Spirit. And, you know, the sun's going down on a beautiful Wisconsin summer day." I had two reactions. First of all, I was like, oh, he ripped off Boston's More Than a Feeling. Interesting. Then when the song kicked in, I looked at Butch and I said, "You ripped off my guitar sound." He added, "So now Nirvana is on the radio every 18 seconds, and of course every time I hear this guitar, I'm like, oh, there's my guitar sound." Of the two bands, Nirvana became a far more popular act on a global level. That left Corgan feeling like he was in a sibling rivalry with Nirvana as he watched his contemporary colleagues achieve greater and greater success. In an interview with Uncut magazine, Butch Vig said, "In early 1991, I was producing Gish with the Smashing Pumpkins when Chris called. They'd signed to Geffen and wanted me to engineer the record. They rattled off some names of possible producers: Ed Stasium, who did the Ramones and Smithereens, Scott Litt and Don Dixon, who did REM, and David Briggs, who had worked with Neil Young." Billy Corgan kept asking if I had heard anything. I realized later that Billy was acutely aware there was a buzz around Nirvana. I heard nothing more for a couple of weeks, then Chris called again. They decided they didn't want to sound like REM or the Smithereens, and Dave Briggs was a burnt-out hippie, so they wanted me to do the record in 10 days' time in LA at Sound City. 4 days later, a rehearsal tape turned up. It began with Kurt introducing Dave Grohl, and then they kicked into Teen Spirit. It's always frustrating when words are taken out of context, which is apparently what happened to Smashing Pumpkins vocalist Billy Corgan during a chat about Kurt Cobain. Specifically, people think he saw Cobain as a full-on rival, which he clarified in another new interview wasn't exactly the case. Corgan told Apple Music One's Zane Lowe that he saw Cobain as the most talented guy of our generation, adding, "Kurt had so much talent, it's like frightening. It was like a John Lennon level of talent where you're like, how can you have all this talent? Or Prince, right? But Kurt's not here, sadly. So I looked around, I was like, alright, well, I could beat the rest of them for sure. When Kurt died, I cried because I lost my greatest opponent. I want to beat the best. I don't want to win the championship because it's just me and a bunch of jabronis, to use a wrestling term." In a conversation with Q101 Chicago's Brian and Kenzie, published on June 30th, however, Corgan set the record straight.
No, the rivalry, I said some things in some recent interviews, and we live in this clickbait world. And what I was trying to say was, like, Kurt was this incredible artist. And, when he was alive and we were both in our mid-20s, well, both bands were competing for the same spot. And so people take that and somehow they turn it into something that it isn't. I think we look back now and we can see that amongst the 90s bands, the Pumpkins and Nirvana and Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden and, Stone Temple Pilots, there were a lot of bands competing for the top spots. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So people try to turn into this weird thing, like somehow it was like something dark, and no, it's just good competition.
Yeah.
It's like you got a Bulls jersey on your wall. I mean, why do we go to the games? Because we want our team to win. nothing wrong with it.
Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins had also famously played a game of Crisco Twister in September 1991 for an MTV program at Bill's Bar in Boston after performing at WFNX's 8th birthday bash. The surreal event involved the members of both bands, with Darcy Retzky of the Smashing Pumpkins in charge of the spinner, and Chris Novoselic of Nirvana, notable for being in his underwear during the game.
You know, it would just, wouldn't be a good thing, so they have time to clean up.
The rivalry between the Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana highlighted the diversity within grunge and alternative rock, showing how different creative visions could both thrive and sometimes collide under the same cultural spotlight. So what are your thoughts on this story? Let us know in the comments, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.